A ceasefire is agreed in Syria. There could finally be a halt to the fighting at midnight tonight. After 5 years of war and at least 400,000 civilian deaths, the nationwide deal was announced by Russia's President Putin.
A trilateral meeting between the foreign ministers of Russia, Turkey and Iran took place in Moscow, during which all three countries took responsibility for not just control but on guaranteeing a peaceful settlement process in Syria.
Also tonight, a warning that longer waiting times this winter at your GP surgery could be putting patients' lives at risk. And the star of Singing in the Rain, Debbie Reynolds, is remembered. She died just one day after her daughter Carrie Fisher.
This is ITV News with Chris Shipp.
Good evening. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has said a ceasefire in Syria has been agreed between government and rebel forces. Russia and Turkey will act as guarantors to the deal, and it will cover the whole of the country. The truce, which is due to begin at midnight tonight, excludes groups deemed by the UN to be terror organisations, such as the so-called Islamic State. Martin Geisler reports.
The bombs kept falling in Syria today. Just hours before a truce was called, an airstrike hit this school on the outskirts of Damascus. 40 people are thought to have died, several children among them. But there is now hope that the chaos could soon be over. Optimistic, perhaps, but at midnight tonight, the Syrian government and the rebels will put down their weapons. An arrangement brokered and guaranteed by two other key players in the conflict, Turkey and Russia.
We know that not long ago a trilateral meeting between the foreign ministers of Russia, Turkey and Iran took place in Moscow, during which all three countries took responsibility on not just control but on guaranteeing a peaceful settlement process in the Syrian Republic.
This is the third attempt to end the fighting in Syria this year. The first was brokered by the United Nations Security Council back in February, but it started to break down almost immediately, completely unravelling by the summer. In September, Russia and the US reached a deal, but it was never properly adhered to. Officially, it lasted just over a week. But this latest deal has Turkey and Russia front and centre. They had backed different sides in the conflict. Now they've agreed to work together. Their interests seemingly outweighing their differences these days. Earlier this month, Moscow and Ankara brokered a ceasefire in Aleppo, allowing tens of thousands of civilians to reach safety. Just last week, the city fell back into government hands, a major turning point in this long and bloody civil war.
This ceasefire covers the whole of Syria and all groups of fighters in the field. During the talks, the Russian government guaranteed to us that they would keep the Syrian regime forces and their allies under control.
If the truce holds, peace talks will begin within a month, but they're set against the backdrop of a country left in ruins. Up to 500,000 lives are thought to have been lost in this conflict, and 4 million Syrians have fled their country. Terror groups like Islamic State are not included in the ceasefire, so fighting will continue in parts of Syria. But for many of those who've endured this chaos for 5 long years, there is, at least, fresh hope.
And Martin joins us from Washington now. Martin, what interests me here is no direct involvement from the Americans in brokering this deal, but the Russians have said there is a role for America in future talks. What do you read into all that?
Well, it was very pointed, all of this, and it was which administration they were talking about that was interesting, Chris. The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, said this today: "I'd like to express my hope that when the administration of Donald Trump assumes its responsibilities, they may also join these efforts in order to work towards this goal in a friendly and collective manner." Now, you know as well as I do, Chris, these words don't fall onto the paper by accident. Every one of them is very deliberately chosen, and this was a very deliberate short-circuiting of the Obama regime. There is no love lost, of course, between Moscow and Washington at the moment. Relations are at a pretty frosty low, but all that could be about to change. Donald Trump, of course, takes office on the 20th of January. Russia is desperate to assert itself at the moment as a major player in the Middle East. Donald Trump was a very vocal admirer of Vladimir Putin's. He talked about him a lot in his election campaign. So, for the coming 3 weeks, all eyes on Syria to see if this fragile ceasefire will hold. And it is very fragile. But after that, after the 20th of January, we may get a look at what the new world order will begin to look like. After the 20th of January, the diplomatic tectonic plates could start to shift.
Changing times. Martin, live in Washington, thank you very much. Britain's most senior GP has warned that patients facing lengthy delays to see their family doctor could be putting their health at serious risk. The warning from the chair of the Royal College of GPs says extended waiting times could lead to non-urgent ailments developing into more serious problems. The government insists more investment in the health service will, in England, create more appointments. Our political correspondent Paul Brand spent the morning at one GP surgery to see what pressures the doctors and patients are facing.
I'm afraid there's no appointments left for today. Our first pre-bookable is on the 9th.
If you're calling up sick at this doctor's surgery in London, the receptionist can't offer much to make you feel better. Patients here face a long wait for an appointment this winter, up to 3 weeks in some cases.
If you're feeling ill and you have to wait for a long time, it's always in the back of mind you're going to get worse.
I know there are thousands of people that come here to this practice, and you can't just say, oh, you're only having 5 minutes, because sometimes there's quite a concern that you need to discuss.
I don't think they're really rushing me or anything like that. And maybe for the fact that I'm not really here. I'm coming, my love, sorry, for the fact that I'm not in here very often.
But while that patient went off to her appointment happy, at the end of the corridor we found an exhausted doctor.
I'll have interacted with at least 150 patients today.
She worries about her own blood pressure, let alone the quality of care she can offer to so many patients.
It's absolutely exhausting, and sometimes, frankly, it feels overwhelming. The list of patients coming in just never seems to stop. If they have to wait too long, then I think there's a real risk that serious things, somebody who's got bleeding but doesn't want to trouble a doctor, somebody who's got a lump that could turn out to be cancerous, could be delayed. And if people are waiting several weeks for an appointment, that delay could be disastrous.
A recent survey completed by GPs found the average waiting time for an appointment was 10 days last year, but 13 days this year, up 30%. Doctors claim it'll be as long as 17 days by next year, and are now warning of a crisis.
The problem is today practices are closing because they don't have the healthcare professionals and they don't have the resource, and that is a serious worry for the whole of the NHS.
In England, the government's promising to open surgeries 7 days a week and to invest an extra £2.5 billion, but only by 2020, which GPs say is yet another long wait for patients who need to be seen now.
And in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, government promises are less clear.
On Wednesday at 9 a.m.
But wherever you are in the UK, you could face a long wait for the doctor and an even longer wait before this particular condition gets any better. Paul Brand, ITV News.
British Cycling has said that it's unable to provide written documentation to prove what was inside a medical package that was delivered to Sir Bradley Wiggins in France in 2011. The revelation comes just a day after the 5-time Olympic champion announced his retirement. The Team Sky boss, Sir Dave Brailsford, has said the package contained a decongestant. The Tunisian man arrested in Berlin yesterday on suspicion of involvement in last week's Christmas market attack has been released without charge. Police had been investigating whether the 40-year-old had any links with the attacker Anis Amri after his number was found on the attacker's phone. And the FTSE 100 share index has recorded a new all-time closing high for the second day in a row. Shares in gold mining and a collapse in the value of sterling helped boost the trading session. Tributes have been paid to Debbie Reynolds, the Hollywood film star who's died at the age of 84. Her death comes just 24 hours after her daughter Carrie Fisher died following a heart attack. Reynolds, whose Hollywood career spanned more than 65 years, is believed to have suffered a stroke. Sally Lockwood looks back at her life and career.
Good morning.
Good morning. We've talked the whole night through.
Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Debbie Reynolds sang her way into the heart of Hollywood at just 18. This role in Singing in the Rain sets her on the path to stardom.
Good morning. Good morning. Come on, girls, jump in. Ma, there's no singing here.
It's great to stay up late. Good morning. Good morning to you.
And more than half a century on, she was still acting, well known as the on-screen mum in US comedy Will and Grace. But it was in her real-life role as a mum that she died of a suspected stroke in distressing circumstances. Her daughter, Carrie Fisher, had died of a heart attack just the day before. Her son, Todd, said her mother's last words, "Where I miss her so much, I want to be with Carrie." The mother and daughter stars had previously had a strained relationship and stopped speaking for several years. But more recently, they became very close, even singing together live on the Oprah Winfrey Show.
I didn't want to do it, I did. I didn't want to do it.
Reynolds collected iconic costumes, and speaking in 2011, she says she felt like Hollywood's mother.
I saved a lot of the legacy, a lot of the stars' costumes. So I'm perhaps everybody's mother.
After being spotted at a beauty contest at just 16, Debbie Reynolds' career went on to span more than 6 decades.
My best film was The Unsinkable Molly Brown. Lucky enough to get that part and nominated for an Academy Award. So that was my best film. Well, Singing in the Rain was the top film that I made when I was just 18 years old.
After such a long and successful career, Debbie Reynolds' voice and laughter will live on for decades to come. And those who knew her best say she's with Carrie now.
Debbie Reynolds, whose death was announced earlier today. And that's all for now. I'll be back with the late news at 11 o'clock. The weather's next, but from me and the whole of the team, have a very good evening. Bye-bye.